Hi, my name is Aya. You're watching Aya Reads, and I'm here to talk about all the books I read in January. So I know this video is going up late, but I don't know what's going on with me. Ever since the beginning of February, I've just been a little bit busy, but also slumping and also not really in the mood to film. So that's why it's a little bit late. But yeah, hopefully you can still enjoy these reviews. So I read 14 books in January, which equates to 4,676 pages. I had one DNF, one 3-star, one 3.5 stars, 5 4 stars, 3 4.5 stars, and 3 5 stars. As you can see, this year I'm going to be utilizing the 0.5 points, mainly because I just want to really give my favorite books I read 5 stars and all the other ones other ratings. Plus, sometimes a book is just like not a 3 and not a 4, but a perfect 3.5. I just want to have more ratings so that it's just going to be easier for myself and hopefully also for you as well. I read 12 adult books and 2 young adult books. I read 1 contemporary novel, 1 fantasy, and 12 romances. And of those 12 romances, 3 were contemporary romances, 2 were dark romances, 1 was a historical romance, 3 were fantasy romances, 2 were sports romances, and I read 1 erotica. I read 11 novels, 1 manga, and 2 novellas. Out of all my goals that I have, I made progress or not progress on 5 goals. My first goal is my series goal. I started 10 series, did not finish one, did not get caught up on one, and also did not DNF one. So last month I had 48 open series, now I have 58 open series. So not doing too well on this goal, but I did 2 vlogs that did require me to start a lot of series. Hopefully I can finish a bunch of series in February, March, and April. Of my goal of reading books that were recommended over 150 times, my total for that is 12. So now I have 12 books that were recommended over 150 times on my list. And last month it was 16 books. So I had progress of 4 books. So I removed actually 8 books from that list, but 4 got added because they reached 150 recommended. So overall it's -4. So I'm on the right track. I read 3 fantasies or romantices, and I listened to 1 audiobook. So it's not the best progress, but hopefully the next couple of months I will make more progress on more of my goals. Now for the wrap up. A lot of them I already talked about in my mid-month wrap up, so I'll leave that linked for you. So in this video, I'll just mention them and direct you to that video. The book that I DNF'd was Magnolia Parks by Jessa Hastings. This one I read for my Reading Booktube's favorite romances of 2023, which I'll leave linked for you. This one was already on my list of books I was never gonna pick up. I was not interested in this book because this book is just not made for me. I don't like books about socialites, which that is exactly what this book is. And I also don't really love cheating in my books unless there's a very good reason for the cheating, which is also a part of this book. But I figured since a lot of people did really love it and it was on a lot of people's favorite lists of 2023, let's just try it. But I only got like 3 chapters in before I DNF'd it. This is just not my type of book. You follow Magnolia and BJ cheated on Magnolia years ago, but they still feel like soulmates. They still sleep in the same bed. He's sleeping with models. She's constantly dating someone. It's just messy, rich people drama that I just don't care about. So I just cut my losses and dipped out. This is just not my book, and I already knew it was not gonna be my type of book. So the first 3 chapters just solidified that, and I'm fine DNFing it. I can see why a lot of other people do love it, but it's just not for me. It's for other people. I had 1 3-star read, and it was Full Metal Alchemist Volume 5. I talked about this in my mid-month wrap-up. I had 1 3.5 star, which I also talked about in my mid-month wrap-up, and it was Desperate Measures by Katie Roberts. I had 5 4 stars, 4 of which I talked about in my mid-month wrap-up, and they were Irresistible by Melanie Harlow, Praise by Sarah Kate, Coming Home by Kennedy Ryan, and The Risk by St. Abbey. The other 4-star read was The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. This book I also read for reading Booktube's favorite romances of 2023. This book you follow Oriah, and she is a human, but her father is a vampire, and her father is the vampire king. So she's basically a princess, but she's human, so she's very, very fragile, and even though she does know how to fight, vampires are just innately stronger. And every 200 years, there is this competition. And if you win the competition, you can ask the goddess, Nyaxia, for anything you want. And basically, only one person wins. And in the competition, she meets a vampire named Rain, and she starts falling for him. And while going through this competition, she learns some things that she never knew before, and maybe some truths about her father and about herself. I really enjoyed this book. It was very entertaining, and I hadn't read, like, this book just reminded me why I love fantasy romances so much and why I should read more of them. I really loved Carissa's writing style. There were so many beautiful quotes in here that I actually quoted in my Goodreads review, which I'll leave that linked for you. I love the world she created, and I really love how the book was formatted, because basically there are, I believe, 7 parts. Let me see if I have that correct. Yeah, 7 parts, and each one is like a part of, like, is named after either a part of the night or a part of like the phases of the moon. It was very well set up. I did enjoy that, and I really enjoyed that after every start of a new part, you get a snippet of like this fairy tale like story, but it's actually Araya's past, and I did really enjoy that as well. The only thing that I was not a big fan of, though, was the romance, unfortunately, which I needed to subtract a star for that, because this is a fantasy romance. It is vital for me to love a romance, for me to give this book a 5-star. I just didn't really fall head over heels with Rain. Like, even now, I read this book, let me see when I finished it. Yeah, so I finished it almost a month ago, and I have not thought about Rain for a single second. While I was reading it, I did enjoy it, but every time I put it down, and even now, I just don't find myself thinking about the romance at all. This is a duology. The way that romance was left off was on a very interesting place, but nothing in me has compelled me to want to pick it up. And there are other books that I read this month where I did have that urge and did actually start reading the second part, even though this book I read first. Like I said, the way she left the romance does have me intrigued, so maybe I'll love it more in the second book. And I do have to say, as much as I do like reading about vampires, they're just not really my favorite type of paranormal creatures, and I prefer reading about them in a paranormal setting as opposed to in a fantasy setting. I just feel like if you're going to create a fantasy world, there are so many things you could do. Vampires are just a little bit boring for me in that aspect, so maybe that also contributed to why this was 4 stars. I am very interested to read more by Carissa Broadbent, though, especially her, like, the first book, The Daughter of No Worlds. That series has me very intrigued. I read 3 4.5 stars. One of them I talked about in my mid-month wrap-up, and it was Pucked by Helena Hunting. The other 4.5 star was Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This one I also read for my video reading Booktube's favorite romances of 2023. This was very hyped last year, and I can definitely see why. I really enjoyed this book. This is like the perfect mix of a romance, a historical fiction, and a fantasy. The historical fiction does have the upper hand, though, so if you're very much a fantasy girly, I'm not really sure you're gonna like this book, because yes, it's set in a fantasy setting, but there's not a whole lot of fantasy going on, just like snippets. It almost feels like a speculative book. Like, there are gods, and they are the reason for the war, and there's these typewriters that have magic. Basically, you follow Roman and Iris, and they are rivals at this newspaper. They both are after the same job, and Iris's brother has gone off to war, and that has led to her mom being an alcoholic, and just like her home life pretty much sucks because of that decision of her brothers. And then one day, she decides to become a war reporter. And before that, she actually starts talking to somebody through the typewriter. And they have these magical typewriters that send their letters to each other. Roman knows that he's talking to Iris. Iris, however, does not know that she's talking to Roman. Eventually, Roman actually follows her off to war, and their love story starts. And I really enjoyed it. I really loved Roman. I thought he was such a sweet, soft boy, and I really like that. Usually I read these like strong alpha type heroes. It was very refreshing to read a different type of hero, and I loved getting to know him through the letters, and I loved this typewriter situation that was going on. I loved Iris. I loved how feisty she was, and I really loved the friendship they built. One thing that I did say in the video where I read this book was that I really loved how Rebecca showed the cost of war, especially through Iris's eyes. So her brother actually goes off to war, obviously, and you see what that does to his family in such a vivid detail and in a such heartbreaking detail. Usually you read from the perspective of the person going off to war, so you don't really get the ramifications of that for the family, and I did appreciate Rebecca showing that cost. And this is actually a YA, and this reminded me that I do still really love YA fantasies, and I should definitely read more of them. One of the reasons why this got 4.5 stars as opposed to 5 was the ending. I'm not gonna spoil it, but the characters made, even though these characters are pretty smart, the decisions they made at the very end of the book made no sense to me, and it soured me on these characters a little bit. It was so dumb and not necessary, so that's why it got a 4.5 in the end. But 4.5 means I still really loved it. I would highly recommend it. And yeah, I will be reading the sequel hopefully in March. Yeah, I think in March, and I cannot wait. The last 4.5 star was actually Binding 13 by Chloe Walsh. Once again, a book I read for that video reading Booktube's favorite romances. I gave this one 4.5. I do have to say this might turn into a 5 star because I did really love it. I did enjoy, these characters really have a chokehold on me still. I still think about them, and this is the book that I talked about while reviewing Serpent and the Wings of Night. Once I finished Binding 13, even though it didn't really fit into my schedule because there was only a couple days before House of Flame and Shadow came out, but I just picked up Keeping 13 immediately because I needed to know what was going on. I really love this book. I love these characters. I love the world she created. I love all the Irish references that were in this book. I love the meet cute between these characters. I loved the car rides with them and them spending time at his home. I also loved the way she set up the other characters. I loved Joey, I loved Gibbs, I loved Claire. Like, she set up these characters so well. Johnny was just amazing. I love how obsessive he was about everything in his life, but also obviously Shannon. I cannot wait to see more of his obsessive side in Keeping 13. And Shannon and also Joey, they just broke my heart. Like, I just want them to be happy. And obviously the way things left off in this book was not that, but I have high hopes that Binding 13 will heal my broken heart for them. I loved a lot of things about this book. The reason this was 4.5 and not 5 is even though the page length does help with me knowing the characters and them having a chokehold on me, because obviously reading 600 pages of 2 characters or more of 2 characters will endear you to them if it's written well, which I think Chloe Walsh is a great author. If you think about it, if you combine Keeping 13 and Binding 13, it's 1,200 pages. That is more than Manifold, whereas that is an epic war fic, whereas this is, like, at the end of the day, even though Shannon has a horrible home life, at the end of the day, it's just a contemporary romance. It does not need to have that many pages. Like, I wouldn't have minded if it was like 400 pages with both, 800 pages overall, but like 1,200, it's just like a little bit too much. And like I said, sometimes it did make sense, but in other times, like, for example, there was this scene between Gibbs and Johnny. Johnny wanting to keep away from Shannon and asking Gibbs his help to do so. That scene, she kept having like the same scene over and over and over again. Like, I'm pretty sure the same scene was like copy pasted like at least 3 or 4 times. Like that, like stuff like that, like it could have been tightened up a little bit through editing. I'm not saying she should leave out 400 pages worth, but like a couple scenes could have been cut out. There were also ex-girlfriend drama that I just did not care about, and I felt like Johnny was being a little bit too over the top with like the age gap thing. In reality, their age gap was only 2 years, but since he was 17 turning 18 and she was 15 turning 16, he felt like that made him like the worst type of like pedo in the world, which, I mean, come on. But like I said, like even though all that bothered me a little bit, at the end of the day, I immediately started Keeping 13, even though I technically did not have the time for it because I really loved Binding 13 so much. So yeah, I would highly recommend it. I can definitely see why a lot of people love it so much, and I'm definitely in that group, and I cannot wait to finish Keeping 13, and I cannot wait to start Joey's story because, like I said, he already has my whole heart and soul. So I cannot wait to read his book. Now for the 5 stars. I had 3 5 stars, and they are also my favorite books I read this month. 2 of them I already talked about in my mid-month wrap-up, and they were God of Malice by Rena Kent and The Highwayman by Kerrigan Byrne. So definitely check out that video if you want to know more of my thoughts on those 5 stars. And the last 5 star was actually House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J. Maas. So this was actually the first time I read this book. I never read it when it came out because I was in a huge reading slump. And it's funny, I don't know what it is about Sarah's books, even though they are compulsively readable to me and her chapters are pretty short, so I get through them very fast. Also, House of Flame and Shadow, which I'm currently reading, that combined with real life things also put me in a reading slump. And I don't understand why, because I love her book. She's my favorite author. Moving on. House of Sky and Breath is the second book in the Crescent City series. I cannot tell you a whole lot about it because obviously I don't want to spoil that series. You follow Bryce Quinlan, who's a half-human, half-fae girl, and her love story with Hunt, who's a fallen angel. But you also follow other characters. Sarah always has this whole cast of characters. And this book, what I really, really loved was Rune, Bryce's brother, and I loved his romance in this book. Like, it was perfect to me. It was so good. I already had a soft spot for Rune in the first book because I felt like Bryce did not treat him well at all. I feel like she was so unfair to him, even though he was one of my favorite characters. So I did really love his character progression in here. And I really love like the real found family that developed in this book. I love it. I love Sarah J. Maas's books. Crescent City is not my favorite series. Maybe it will in the future. But like I said, I love Sarah J. Maas. I love her books. I love her writing. She's my favorite author, and I am not ashamed of that at all. And I don't think anybody should be. But yeah, those were the 14 books that I read in the month of January. Definitely let me know in the comments below if you've read any of these books and what your thoughts were. And I'd also really love to know your favorite book that you read in January, or some of your favorite books that you read in January. And I really hope you enjoyed this video. Definitely let me know by leaving a like if you did. And thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.